it's simply impossible to ignore tensions within the coalition government over whether Prime Minister Scott Morrison should commit Australia to net zero emissions by 2050. The PM announced today that he will indeed attend the Glasgow Climate Summit. And whether you believe the planet is warming or not, one thing's for sure, the temperature is rising in our political system. Ever since Tony Abbott defeated Malcolm Turnbull for the leadership of the Liberal Party in December 2009, internal divisions over climate change and reduction of carbon emissions has destroyed numerous leaders of both of our political parties. Remember Kevin Rudd? Climate change was the great moral issue of our time. Then it wasn't when he was humiliated in Copenhagen. Remember Julia Gillard? No carbon tax under any government she led. Then she was forced to renege on that promise and eventually signed an agreement with minor parties in the Greens. Emissions policy is back centre stage again. This week, Josh Frydenberg warned us that Australia risks becoming an investment pariah should it not sign up to the 2050 target. And our Prime Minister has clearly been under pressure from senior business leaders, including Twiggy Forrest. The Prime Minister brandished coal in question time once, much to the mirth of the backbenchers, but not too many people in the coalition are smiling this weekend when the National Party meets to consider its position. Some have already indicated they'll vote against zero emissions regardless of the party's line. George Christensen said as much on this program a fortnight ago. On the night of 18 May 2019, our Prime Minister proclaimed that he believed in miracles. The next couple of days will determine whether he believes in keeping his promises. The fate of the coalition literally hangs in the balance. And in an excellent piece in The Australian this week, Peter Credlin captured the alienation of many of the conservative Liberals as well. Make no mistake, this is not merely about the National Party. The reverberations about what happens in the National Party room on Sunday and the joint party room next week could well decide whether this government survives intact going into the next election or whether this Prime Minister indeed retains his position. And Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce now joins me from Bingara, where he's been with the ladies of the CWA, who are celebrating a centenary up there. And they've had continuity of leadership, only 2 presidents in 100 years. Well, Deputy Prime Minister, thank you for joining the McGregor angle.
You're welcome, Catherine.
It must be approaching the toughest party room meeting of your time in politics. Is that fair on coming Sunday?
I think as a leader, probably yes, Catherine. I think that'd be a fair call. Obviously went through the Telstra debate when I first arrived, and I was a backbencher, just arrived, new to Parliament, new staff, and as the swinging vote in the Senate, because we won it with the Liberal Party campaigning against me and the Greens and One Nation and Pauline Hanson all campaigning against me, but we won it. We had a real say in what happened in the Telstra issue, and then the ETS debate and the AWB debate, but none of them as leader. And this one, as leader, is going to be absolutely seminal. It's complex. Yep. We've got to try and make sure we do the very best as the Nationals as a group for regional people. Yep.
Barnaby, without preempting, because I know there are feelings running very high both within your own ranks and also on the government's back bench, I might add. I think the media's missed the fact that there's quite strong feeling in the Conservative wing of the Liberal Party. But is your sense that you can stay in the coalition given the Prime Minister's stance on net zero by 2050? Do you think we're at that point where it really is a deal breaker for you, given what you campaigned on in 2019?
I think it's really important that we go over the details. The first thing that's really important is it's not my decision, it's the Nationals party room decision.
Sure.
I'm a member of it. I'll certainly be an independent arbiter, and I'll try to gather the thoughts of the room in a cogent form at the end. But we have to look at it in every facet. First thing, in our nation's purview, how does this work for our nation? Secondly, how does it work for regional people? Thirdly, what is the what are the potential outcomes on all scenarios of what happens next? And, I want to make sure that regional people have the best capacity for us to negotiate or to rule out, but to do either of those with a cogent argument that we can give back to the Australian people as to why.
And Barnaby, are you surprised that the Prime Minister has not introduced nuclear into this debate? Because we seem to be ready to slash our wrists on an abundant supply of coal, which as recently as this week China's devouring at a great rate. And we've gone into a nuclear submarine powered deal, but we're turning our back entirely on the nuclear option for generation of power. Is that something you'll be seeking to extract a concession from the government, Prime Minister, on?
Well, I think people know right from the get-go that I'm a supporter of nuclear power, and I think ultimately Australia is going to arrive at that place, like so many other countries around the world. In fact, I think of all the OECD countries, we're the only one that doesn't use it, which is a little bit odd. Yeah. But the Australian people have got to be ready to go on that journey as well. And what would be really brave, because we know if it's bipartisan and the Labor Party decide they want it, well, we can then move forward. But we know that the Labor Party will play us for a break and run the fear factor, and that is their want. We want to make sure that people clearly understand as we go into the future, we're heading towards small modular reactors, 4.5 metres wide, 7 metres tall. That'll be the way of the future, made in a factory. One would have the capacity to power all of Tamworth, all of Armidale, and probably Inverell as well. They'd be buried underground. You wouldn't even see them. The Australian people have got to understand and they arrive at that space. What I am encouraged by, Catherine, is with the advent of us being involved now in nuclear submarines, in my office, maybe another office, I haven't had one complaint about them being nuclear. Not one. Issues that people talk to you about the French and relationship, but not. It seems to most people say this question, this is a decision that we should have taken years ago. Yeah.
I was a little surprised at the published polling about that, I've got to say myself, Barnaby. It did look very promising that people were quite accepting of it. But given the alienation amongst people in the regions, the people who really held firm in 2016 when you saved Malcolm Turnbull's bacon, and again the National Party members like George Christensen holding Dawson despite the assault of the anti-Adani mine gang and so forth, can you see a point in maybe running three-cornered contests to maximise the Conservative vote at the next election if it is impossible to keep your troops in line? Is that a viable prospect under the coalition agreement?
No. You get three-cornered contests either. There'd be two people who would lose, the National Party and the Liberal Party. That won't work. So what we can say is that we clearly understand in the Nationals that coal is absolutely fundamental, not only to regional areas, but to our nation's books. It's one of your biggest exports. If you lose it, if it was gone, you are poorer. And that means when you come to a government and say, I want to increase my pensions, probably won't have the money. You would say, I want a new hospital, probably the money's not there. And say, well, the NDIS, I've got issues with the NDIS. The money's not there. The answer you'll get to so many questions will be very simple. Well, we know because we shut down one of our nation's largest income earners, sometimes the largest. And, no one likes a big dirty hole in the ground. We all get that. But the thing is, you've got to understand that we don't export computers or Boeings, or we don't have the financial centre like London does, or pharmaceuticals. We don't make aircraft carriers or trucks or cars or large complicated machinery like the Germans. You know what we make? Iron ore, coal, gas, farming products. These are the things that we export. And if you start shutting them down, there's only one outcome. You're poorer.
If there's one thing that you would seek from the Prime Minister as an assurance to regional Australia in your core constituency, Barnaby, what will you put on the table as the price of getting on board for this deal? Well,
everything is just about, you say, okay, you go through the areas and you say, well, okay, how does this area go into the future? How does this area go into the future? How do we make sure that regional people, to be quite frank, whether we sign up to 2050 or not, if that's the way these people are going in Glasgow, then I suppose we're just, we've got to accept that, but by default we'll end up as part of the process because the whole world around us will be going in a certain direction. But nonetheless, we've got to make sure that we make Australia in regional areas as strong as possible, not just for regional areas, because that's where the wealth of our nation comes from. You might spin it round in the capital cities, and that's great. Everybody goes there, vital part of our nation, incredibly important. So the GDP might spin around in the capital cities, but the money that actually goes in there to spin comes from regional areas. And so we've got to look after these regional areas, not for the sake of just regional areas, but for the sake of our nation's economy.
And finally, what did you make of Twiggy Forrest's intervention this week? I thought there was a lot of hubris there for someone who doesn't actually have to take any sacrifice or run for election. What did you make of that? I thought it was incredibly patronising to Matt Canavan and Senator Bridget McKenzie.
Yeah, it's going well to the press conference. That's what I'd say about that. Look, you can't start bucketing on people. It's a mistake people make if they're not in politics. If you start bucketing on someone at a press conference, such as Bridget McKenzie or Matt Canavan, and then within a day are trying to get their support, well, you've gone about the wrong way, And what Andrew Forrest has done in regards to export of iron ore, congratulations, well done, okay? And that's great for him. Not jealous of him in any way, shape or form, but it's great for us. But we can only do it, make that money if we've got a strong nation. And representatives of those nations are not there they're not self-appointed. They're appointed by the vote of the Australian people in their respective areas. So when you bucket on a senator from Queensland, you're not actually bucketing on that person, you're bucketing on the state of Queensland who sent them to Canberra. And likewise, a senator from Victoria. You're not just bucketing on the senator of Victoria, you're bucketing on the state of Victoria because they sent them to Canberra. And you've got to be mindful of that. As you mightn't agree with them, but you say that they're not there by their own volition. They're there by appointment of the people who voted for them and sent them there.
Indeed. And, well, Barnaby, I think come Sunday, a lot of your team will be remembering the people who did send them to Canberra in the first place. It'll be an interesting outcome, regardless of what happens, and I wish you well. Thank you for making time for joining the McGregor Angle, and have a great weekend.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show.